Hello, friends. My name is Puesto Enrico, sometimes called Host Eric by people who speak American. Remember, you can't spell America without Eric. And can't spell England without Ing. Regardless, YouTube, Mindy's Klub, talking with famous people. Three things that exist. My life is all about YouTube, and it has been for a long time now. It's my primary concern and consideration of self. It's true, you can't spell England without gland. You can't spell Germany without germ. What do you think about that? That's pretty sad for Germany. They had to be germ. I'd rather be gland than germ. So, well, that's true. There's no man, there's no Germany without man. You can't spell Germany without man. And many of them as well. So really, it should be you can't spell Germany without men then. But of course, then there wouldn't be many of them. There'd be many of them. It's funny how Rachel, generally speaking, correctly enunciates E's versus I's versus A's. You know, she pronounces the distinction between pen and pen. Which is real, but small, right? It's a small distinction. You have to be attuned to tonal nuances to make that distinction, I guess. Today's a busy day ahead of me. Very busy day ahead of me. And I wanted to talk about YouTube a bit. So, I just gave out my address to a texter, which I am pretty cautious about, but they said they're in New York and they want to send me something. And they'd engaged with me before via text, so it wasn't their very first text. And the texts that came before were not indicative of a problem person, really. So I wanted to also talk about this show called Uncle from Another World on Netflix. It's an isekai-based comedy anime that the joke of it is, so this like 17-year-old or 16-year-old's uncle, who's like 35, he had gone into a coma when he was 16 or 17. Has been in an isekai for the last 15, 20 years. The last 20 years, I guess it is. And then has now woken up from his coma and is back in the regular world. And he's a YouTuber. I mean, they don't call it YouTube, but basically he's a YouTuber. Actually, they do. I think they might even call it YouTube because they refer to the specifically the event. Well, I'm not inherently opposed to that, uh, which may have something to do with why I sent my address to this person, is because I was extra cautious with this address because of my dad living here, and I've been the recipient of a doorbell ring from a off kilter person. You know, I'm feeling fine. I'm feeling great, really. Um, I'm feeling a lot of things. You know, sadness is one of them, but it's it's not the most prevalent of the emotions. And I was struck the other day by how I recall when my grandmother, my mother's mother, died, and how little time she spent mourning. Very little. Uh, and when Delilah and April were both over here the other day, yesterday maybe it was, yesterday I guess it was, I thought to myself, or commented to Rachel, it hasn't felt this alive around here in a long time. You know? The bottom line is, as people near the end of their life, the long term becomes shorter and shorter term. And the possibilities for launching new endeavors of any sort, um, engaging in long term projects, being active and productive in ways beyond just self serving ways. Like, my my parents spent their whole retirement, which was substantial. It's like my dad retired at like 60 or something like that, you know? That's true, Ike OG. I mean, a t-shirt does equal a stomach and nipple cover, but aren't you really giving short shrift to the shoulders and back? I think you are. Um, you know, the alternative is always worse, that the parent outlives their child. We need these generational dynamics and this understanding of stretches of your life and what you're doing with them, um, to provide meaning and purpose for us. We need younger people to be safe baskets in which to put our emotional eggs. And the older somebody gets, the more certainly unsafe the basket in which you're putting your emotional eggs. And decreasingly the ability of those individuals to find any satisfaction in baskets and eggs, you know? But anyway, my parents spent their whole retirement doing things they wanted to do, enjoying themselves. But there's a difference between enjoying and maintaining yourself. Like that represented the successful completion of a plan and a journey, right? Life requires you to have plans and journeys to still be purposeful or meaningful. And when your plans and journeys are all about death, as it was at the end there for my father, the last couple of years have been all about death. Ultimately, maybe not that first year, which was more about my mom and adapting to a weird new reality with me being back home and stuff like that. And my dad and I having some chances to spend some time together and get kind of re-intimately acquainted, since I hadn't spent that much time with my parents, obviously, during the bulk of their retirement and my adulthood, because we were both busy doing our own things, you know. My parents traveled a lot. The thing is, that journey, like I said, didn't come out of nowhere and didn't stretch on indefinitely. My dad won, right? Like, he got to the point in the game where he was getting fat monthly checks from his former employers, the state of California, for doing nothing except being retired. Plus, he had his various investments and stuff, so that they were empowered to do what they wanted for, 20 years, 25 years, something like that. And did. And yet, they were never engaged in the sort of thing that could ever make me happy. I would never be happy doing my own thing, empowered to do my own thing in isolation like that. And I guess my parents weren't entirely isolated. They had their friends, they had their social shit. But I mean, they weren't making anything. They weren't creating anything. They weren't interested in defining their lives for other people, because it was my dad's frame of reference ultimately. Eric, when are you coming to Romania? I have no plans to go to Romania. And not to say it's impossible that it might happen someday, you know. That may be something that Rachel and I do for a honeymoon or something, you know. We're going to get married after my mom passes and we deal with these funerals. After we have 2 funerals, we'll have a wedding. It's going to be small and not expensive. I don't want to spend a lot of money on this getting married thing. I don't want to spend a lot of money on the accoutrements of it. I do plan to get Rachel a nice-ish engagement ring, but I don't want to spend a shit ton of money on an engagement ring. Shit like that it matters a little bit because it's kind of a one-time event, but it's also only as important as it is to the person wearing the ring, really. It doesn't matter to me whether she has a fancy engagement ring or just me wrapping some aluminum foil around her finger. It's all the same for me. But it doesn't make it the same. I recognize that it's not the same. And so, I've already talked to her about that, like, I want her to look around and decide what kind of ring she wants, because I think it'll matter to her. And it's also kind of a weird, it's also kind of a weird thing. It's like, I have expectations regarding what I want her to do with the latitude I provide from my half of these discussions, So it's like, I want her to make some choices, but I also I'm going to be interpreting those choices and what they mean. So I have faith that we're fully on the same page about things in general, regardless. But this is a very interesting time for me and Rachel. It's not just a, a, a sad time or a death time. I'm done living about death. I could. I didn't. It hadn't occurred to me until yesterday that the last 3 years have been all about death, and that I have a lot of life left in front of me, a lot of productive years. The real meat of my life is ahead of me still. The time period when I'm most capable of making work that matters to me and that I think is important or significant, about defining who I am for posterity, whatever that's worth. Hi, Andre. I don't particularly like to travel. I find it very expensive, and I hate flying. Not that I'm scared of it or anything, but I just dislike it a lot. Seems like I always get sick whenever I go on vacation. Usually on the way back. I'm doing great. Yeah, the sad stuff's sad. It has to be. That's part of the whole picture, right? Would Mindy go into a store looking for a lawnmower and get upset because the price she wanted the price wasn't what she wanted? Mindy doesn't touch lawnmowers. Mindy, who's this person here, might be a little racist. Though I've never heard her say anything racist. She might be a little racist. Like, actually racist. Whereas, like, Tiffany might say she's racist, but is actually not racist at all. Like, she'll say things like, "But you're a boy. You can't go with another boy. That's homophobic." No, that's homosexual, Tiffany, not homophobic. Hi, it doesn't matter how you are. It's okay with me. Yeah, well, like I said, the last 3 years have been about death. And though it wasn't something I thought explicitly in these terms or anything like that, we've been waiting. We've been waiting for the moment when my dying parents are no longer our waiting for our responsibility to shift into something that was about us. The thing is, I had lived all about me until about 3 years ago. And well, until I left Temple City, I had a very different life, and my parents and I had very separate lives, and I didn't talk to them very much. Not that we had any difficulty between us; it just they weren't interested in what I was doing, and I wasn't interested in what they were doing. Frankly, over the last 3 years, my life's been about learning to live in the frame of serving another purpose than your own, whatever. And I never really did get the hang of it. But I never tried to be bad. I never tried to fail. And I often tried to be good and tried to fill my duties as a son as best I could. I mean, it's hard to say as best I could. You know, it's like I could have done better. It's a lie to say otherwise, but how's your boyfriend, Eric? Question from yesterday. SI picking on your last stream. Who's my boyfriend? Or are you talking about when I sang, my boyfriend's back and you're gonna be sorry. Hey now, my boyfriend's back. I don't know who my boyfriend is. Well, I kind of have a crush on both Steve Martin and Martin Short right now. I also said that we were going to have fun until Daddy took the T-Bird away, but Daddy's dead, so, and I don't have a T-Bird, so that doesn't make any sense at all. Got a lot of stuff going on today. I need to call the mortuary that I went to yesterday and give them some information about my dad. And then I need to go to a meeting with the lawyer and Delilah at 1 o'clock. Then I think I have a fancy YouTube party to go to tonight. I mean, she looks dramatically further along in the progression than she did a week ago. It's weird. I don't think she's going to last much longer, really. When she first got back from the hospital, I was like, oh my God. Why did they even send her to the hospital? She's exactly the same as she was a month and a half, 2 months ago. But since then, in the last 2 weeks or however long it's been, she's gone dramatically downhill. I told her, she didn't give me any indication of understanding anything. She's got this like bruise on her forehead where I guess she fell out of her wheelchair, and you know, it's like she's extremely well cared for where she is. She's in a nice nursing home, and she's got these hospice nurses coming in and all this other stuff, right? But it seems to happen a lot with people who've been married a really long time. Like my parents were married 59 years, and seems like when that happens, the spouses go in pretty quick succession to one another within a month or two, you know? And it's how it should be. I feel sad for my dad that he lost my mom before she died. And wasn't ever able to intuitively process that because of his shitty NI. Antipolar is perhaps the most subject to slow boil of anybody. Yeah, complex loss, dementia, a missing person, etc. is especially tough to navigate. Aren't only kids somewhat of an anomaly even there? Yeah, I guess we're not the most... It seems like most of the people I knew, really all of them now that I think about it, in my peer group where I was growing up, they all had siblings. Actually, now that I think about it, I was the only child I knew. I'd never really thought about that before. It's kind of surprising to say. I'm thinking back to all my childhood friends and everything, and I really was the only child I knew. So I guess they're not very common. But my daughter's an only child, so it seems common to me. I think only children and their parents are able to sustain an illusion of unity as a family better than families with multiple kids. The unity is supposed to be between the brothers and sisters ultimately, and it's like I always had such a small nuclear family, but I had a lot of great aunts and great uncles. My grandmother, my mother's mother, was one of 8 living children. They like to say all these 8 living children. They were one of 9 because they counted the stillborn 9th baby that my great grandmother had as a sibling. Even though that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense at all. That shouldn't count that. Even as a kid, I thought, why are you counting that? As a person, as like a sibling. It was never born alive, it was born dead. But why would you count that as a person, as a brother or sister? I forget which kind of baby it was, but regardless. But yeah, I probably. Well, no, not necessarily. Somebody emailed me this morning wanting a typing session, but it was sort of a. Can I pay you in October for a typing session now thing? Which I'm not. Why don't we just wait till October, I guess, I would say. Probably just, I might respond to it, I don't know. Shit like that, I don't know what to do with it usually. It's a mixed bag for me of, yes. On the one hand, if they're going to publish, well, as a general rule, I think it's good for me to continue to publish as many typing sessions as I can do and publish. It's also the case that I definitely don't want to do free typing sessions just for the sake of getting free content. Because, for one thing, there needs to be a barrier to entry, or else people who get typed simply won't take it seriously enough. And, in other words, if I type people for free, then you can presumably get me to type you for whatever reasons you have at no cost to you, which may not even align with my own at all. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, if I charge like $200, then I only get people who are freakish about typology stuff and or very rich. So the thing is, I mean, I don't find that my I find myself at the moment feeling anyway a lot more free to give things my full attention and do a good job than I was before, to the extent that there's any difference at all. I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing, so whatever's in front of me I'm paying attention to as indicated by and large, even when other stuff's going on. But regardless, when you're 51 years old, like me, or am I 52 now? Am I 52? I was born in 71. What year is it? 22? I guess I'm 51. When you're 51 years old, like me, and you've spent the last several years doing what I've been trying to do, which is be a good son as best I can, while also recognizing that on some level, my being here fundamentally was a disappointment to my father. Like, yes, he needed me here when, at the end of the time that my mother was here at the house, before it got too overwhelming for us and we put her in a nursing home. For those several months, not a whole ton of months, maybe 5 or 6 months or something, that I was here helping with that, I was needed, necessary. But even so, my dad didn't really do a great job of letting me help, because he already had in place all of his existing with all of the existing stuff, you know. He had his own protocols, his own habits, his own whatever. He had been taking care of my mom without me here for a while, and SI Tool, it's like, it's a bitch to integrate new things into your life. Adjusting to being here with my dad, and then adjusting to suddenly Rachel being here too, which, as I've gone over before, was never planned. It all just kind of happened, you know, due to a lot of circumstances outside either me or Rachel's control. So when you spend the last 3 years like I have, and your parent dies, even if they kill themselves, like my dad did, it's a very different experience than if you're 20-something and your parents die, or 30-something even and your parents die. As I indicated earlier in the stream, I remember my mom's dealings with after my grandmother died, who also died at, I think, 84. She might have been 82, but, you know, my great-grandmother died at 99. My dad's mother died in her 70s. And my dad's father died some time back, but we never knew him. He abandoned my dad and my dad's mom and my dad's sister when my dad was a kid. And my dad had to be sort of man of the farm for some stretch of time until they moved into town. I don't think they had a whole hell of a lot, you know. You speak a lot about how your dad did not take you seriously. Is there a certain way you were supposed to be that would have made a difference in how your dad thought of you? Is it a type related thing? Yeah, it's a type related thing. Um, he was my benefactor type. I'm his beneficiary type, and to succeed on his merits, I would have had to be a lot less intuitive and a lot more practical. I would have had to do a better job of independently handling shit or whatever. When his third slot extroverted intuition meant he was selfish about it. He did not want extroverted intuition matters to come from other people. No, I'm extroverted intuition. But what I mean by intuitive is simply that my attention wasn't on practicalities very much. And it took me a lot of time to I guess reel in my impulsivities and so forth. Uh, I feel like my decision making and my capacity to be an adult are where they need to be for me to be an adult now. It's said by people, not me, that a person doesn't really become an adult until their parents die. Well, for me, you could say I didn't really become an adult on some level until my dad died on Monday. But I was ready to be an adult, very over ready. Uh, the circumstances I were in both liberated me and trapped me for the last 3 years. It's like, yeah, I've been taken care of at a minimum level and not worked and been basically broke for a few years, uh, but also safe in the decaying womb of my parents' home as I fulfilled the back end of the deal, right? Like when I was a baby, they were here taking care of me. So as my mom turned into a baby, came back and took care of her until she moved into the nursing home. At that point, I was trying to deal with basically an ESTJ father trying to determine the end of his own life over the course of several years, framing it fundamentally as making sure his wife not was enjoying what he stated on multiple occasions she had earned. I guess probably highlighting the fact that I had not earned. My dad uses extroverted intuition to come up with basic ass shit like, I think we should go to Cheesecake Factory next week and call medical transport to bring your mother, and we'll have a get together there. Or, earlier in his life, it was to go to new places, and he'd planned different trips. My parents were always traveling and going places and doing things, but my dad's extroverted intuition didn't manifest as real creativity. His creativity was manifest in choosing this or that for vacations and stuff, you know? But you could really see what third slot extroverted intuition looked like based not on how he extrovertedly intuited, but more in his total lack of openness to any ideas that came from anybody else about anything, really. Practical. And his dismissal of the non-practical stuff as largely irrelevant to anything. Just a matter of semantics or something else to be waved away with. That's not the way the world works, Eric. He was a great man. I loved him. Most of all, I respected him and recognized that he was more of a man than I'll ever be, you know? And that's okay. I'm not interested in being that kind of man. I respect it a lot. I benefited from it a lot. But I'm not him. And I don't want to be. Any polar, I mean, I don't know. It probably plays out a lot differently. If you want to think about third slot, just think about the fact that I'm very interested in being the one that's getting feedback. I'm not very interested in giving feedback. Some people mistakenly believe that this means I just want praise or affirmation or something like that. That's not what third slot FE means. It just means, to the extent that extroverted feelings shit is significant, I want it to be on my terms. And ideally, it's not very significant. When I call it a scorecard function, it means in part that, yeah, I'm going to feel a lot of satisfaction when I kill it on FE grounds. But that's more in terms of, I mean, what that really means is I'll never feel like I adequately am myself, know myself, and being myself without presenting it for others to look at. So it's the case as well that my dad never could be himself properly without being in control of the new ideas, to the exclusion of potentially interfering newness from others. Do you think to be yourself you need to know yourself? No. I think that that's only true for types that are very metaphysical. To be myself, I have to know myself. To be myself well. Everybody's necessarily going to be themselves. They can't be anything else. But it is the case that we have opportunities to optimize, some of which we should take. For I think for ENTPs and INFJs alike, to be ourselves well requires us to have a correct map of self, or a map of selves in general, and a map of self, and multiple maps really, but you can't. It's all a mess. You necessarily continuing forward as though you did have maps because you're mapping types, but it's all a big mess until you have an actual metaframe that you can use as a universal translator. And that's what cognitive functions is a way to universally translate anything into an operationalizable, meaningful expression. It's meaningful to say the reason it's unfair to blame that person for not being able to recount to you an SI style story of a succession of events and details and meow, right? So, you want us to form a human blanket to cuddle your prickliness? Well, it helps me to, I feel okay when I'm experiencing being okay in this way. Like, in the context of other people. That here I am holding court about whatever. That people are here listening. These are not terrible and tragic times, okay? I know everybody's been trained to say that kind of shit, but these are expected and timely times, ultimately. The irony of this one of the great ironies of this whole thing, frankly, is, well, my dad died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. COVID killed him. There's no fooling myself about this. COVID killed my dad. He got it a second time, and he got it really bad, and it fucked him up. It fucked him up in multiple ways. And he hadn't been sick. Like he said, I hadn't been sick like this in decades. And I said the same thing. He couldn't remember ever being sick like that. Yeah, everybody's taught to be certain kinds of FE during situations like this because you got to err on the side of caution. You don't know how sensitive the other person is about it. And the thing is, it's like, I'm trying to, it doesn't change my views on it at all. The reality is, if we had listened to Eric and just let it run its course initially, my dad probably would have been in good enough health to get it and recover from it. But I don't feel angry that COVID ended up taking his life, or think I was wrong about anything. I was completely right about everything. Everything's proven that to me. As I said at the beginning of the pandemic, as they described it, wow, this sounds like a dream pandemic. It kills the very old and sick and leaves everybody else untouched? What? Because that's how it was initially being pitched, you know? Let it run its course, motherfuckers. Is the thing that makes more sense than anything you could ever dream of saying at that point, right? Because we can't pretend away the reality that old and sick people are a different kind of basket, holding a different kind of eggs than young and healthy people. What makes a death tragic is when a lot of potential is lost. My father had exhausted his potential. He no longer had his remaining purpose from his own perspective was making sure that I was okay, Delilah was okay, and that his dying wife died with as much dignity as she could. So, the thing is, those tasks were done. You know, he had made sure that Delilah and I were going to be okay, and that his wife was going to die with as much dignity as she could. When COVID knocked him on his ass and literally made him fall, he was never like a slip and fall kind of guy. He didn't have balance issues or things like that. He fell twice when he had COVID. The first time he didn't hurt himself really. The second time he broke 2 ribs and then even when he got over COVID, he had just this, you know, assaultive anxiety, and I didn't know what to do about it. And I mean, tragic's not very subjective. We can actually define it in terms of potential loss. Things are tragic because they're deaths that shouldn't have happened, or they're untimely deaths, or premature in some regard. Everybody's going to die, and in the best case scenario, it plays out. For my dad, that was the best case scenario that his life could have played out as. He had control over everything until his dying breath. He had complete control over everything. And that's what he wanted, you know. Over everything that mattered. He was king of his kingdom, and his kingdom respected his sovereignty because he was a wonderfully good king. But when I think about it, it seems insane to me to have lived such a long time and left behind essentially nothing in terms of work done. I mean, he did shit tons of work, but what he left behind was not so much work completed as wealth accumulated, which is not a bad thing. It's a wonderful thing, but he converted all of his work was monetizable, and that which wasn't making money was spending money. And you know, he was a wonderful man who lived a wonderful life that I would never find wonderful, because it wasn't the life of an intuitive. 84. So that's fine. He and I are different people, you know? And I loved him as best I could. Love him still to the extent that that's meaningful. I'm very grateful to him for all he did for me and Mom, and for doing the right thing with his FI, which is he took care of the few people who were in his inner circle like nobody could take care of somebody. Having depression, being physically disabled by a succession of, like, the thing is, he was always deaf, but he was going blind too, and that made it hard for him to read, which he'd enjoy. There's a lot of shit going on, you know. It was hard for him to get around because he'd broken 2 ribs, although he was healing surprisingly quickly. And his birthday was yesterday, 85th. He was just done, you know. It was his. He was always going to go out like that. He made that clear to me a long time ago. Many times he repeated it to me that he was not going to be hooked up to any machines. He did not want to be a vegetable or anything like that. He didn't want to end up like my mom, and that he was not going to let it happen. I mean, it was always going to happen. I was surprised to learn from Delilah that he only recently got that handgun. Paid $450 for it. He was texting with his friend Richard about buying a handgun for protection. You know. I don't judge him for it. I don't view his death as a suicide. Ultimately, I view it as my dad choosing to determine the moment of an end that was looming. And determining that the moment at which quality of life concerns outweighed sanctity of life concerns. I get it. You know, he was always somebody who didn't want to have to particularly justify himself. He wanted his wishes respected. So he was maniacal about defining ownership areas because he wanted to love the people he loved, his family, the best visibility, but he didn't want any of us touching his stuff, you know? So he was a thorny person to love, especially for me, because he doesn't want any of my extroverted intuition. That is not how I can show him that I care about him. The only way I could ever do that was by doing little tasks and stuff that were already understood that needed to be done, like regular things like take out the trash cans, stuff like that. Of course it's legal in my city. It's legal everywhere. There's no place in the United States of America where it is not legal to own a gun and have one in your own home. It's a constitutionally protected right. I haven't even looked in the closet. I don't know if the cops took our rifle or not. They might have taken it with them. Yeah, unless you're a felon. I don't agree with that, but that's the case. You're right. I don't think it should be like that. America's not dangerous. Don't be silly. No, he wasn't a felon. My dad was in 2 branches of the military. He technically served in Korea, although he didn't see any action. He was on a boat, you know. And it was like the very tail end of the Korean police action. Anyway, then he served in the army, and he was in Europe during the 60s, traveling around with my mom, playing in the army traveling jazz band that went around from French village to French village playing shows for the people. It's sort of like a post-war leftover that dragged into the 60s, you know. He raced Mini Coopers in Europe. He was at the Le Mans race working for the Ford team on that Le Mans race that they made the movie about. He was there working for the Ford team, like holding signs or something. You know, he's like one of those guys. He's in a book about car racing mentioned as going to the hospital with the soon-to-be widow of a race car driver who had just been rushed to the hospital after a horrific crash. Do you need a license to own a gun? No, you just, there's a background check and a waiting period, I believe. You don't need a license to own a gun. But I'm not very into guns. If the cops did take our rifle, which they might have, because, you know, cops like to seize guns for no reason. I mean, obviously, they took the handgun. Um, if they did take the bolt action rifle, I'll feel kind of sad because it's it's got childhood linkage to me. You know, I remember as a child, my parents' bedroom was where the office is now. It was before the remodel. And my dad's rifle, which is 22, you know, it was in his closet in the back corner, with where there were lots of boxes of ammunition as well. And I remember being told not to touch it or play with it. And I never really did touch it or play with it but my dad took me shooting one time when I was pretty little still. And I guess I probably didn't like it. I don't remember us going shooting again after that, you know. But wasn't hunting, it was like shooting at targets. I don't remember if we set it up, I think we went to a firing range maybe. Because I remember there being like targets down the field. Well, you'd think they'd have to return it, Lou, to Faye. But, you know, it's the cops. I mean, actually, it's the Arcadia Police Department. I could probably get it back. And by the end of the whole thing, everybody was being pretty nice to us. At the beginning, they were a little suspicious. But I think it didn't take too long for them to realize that this was what it appeared to be. I guess the thing that was initially a little confusing is when we called it in as a slip and fall injury because we thought that's what it was. I don't know. It just somehow 2 and 2 didn't go together. We hear so many loud bangs around here. This is the key thing. We until about a month ago, the house next door was engaged in this year. It seems like they were doing who knows God knows what kind of construction for the last 2 years. Since the start of COVID, it's been nothing but construction sounds from over there. Bang, bang, bang all the time. So even though it's stopped about a month ago, we've grown very accustomed to random loud bangs happening. And in general, there are lots of weirdly loud moments of things around here. Like this morning, there was this lady peacock out in the back. I squirted with the hose to make it go away because she was making this particularly loud and annoying goose-like peacock sound that they sometimes make in the morning, especially. And it's right outside the window where Rachel's sleeping, and I already know that Rachel doesn't want the peacocks in the backyard. She doesn't like it, and Peter's the only one that is allowed back because he's been grandfathered in from when my mother started feeding him 10 years ago. Yeah, shecock. That's what they should call them. You're absolutely right. They actually call them peahens, but I much, much prefer shecock. In fact, I think I'm going to cop that joke of yours there, Ruben, and make a Mindy's Club short with it. I'll have Tiffany say, "Why doesn't that peacock have any of those big feathers?" And Mindy will say, "Because it's a female." And then Tiffany will say, "You mean it's a shecock?" I bet it'll do well. If we get some peacocks in the background, do I have your go-ahead on copying your joke and making a short of it, Ruben? Because I am going to do that if I do. It's a good joke. I'm feeling a need to... Well, this is one thing I haven't... shecock reminds me of shemale. I know. It does. Which reminds me of this hilarious freestyle that Corey made with me a long time ago. Which is this Andy Rooney. Andy Rooney loves... Have you ever noticed shemales all around you in bed? Have you ever... Don't you hate it when you wake up and All the she-males are gone. It was a pretty good freestyle. I don't know if I still have a recording of it. Probably somewhere I could figure out where it is, but thanks, Ruben. You're a real you're what they call comedian's friend. It's like, have you ever heard of that cleaner stuff called barkeeper's friend? It's a specific kind of like Comet, basically, but supposedly better, that you rub on your counters to clean them, called bartender or barkeeper's friend. Anyway, you're a real comedian's friend, Ruben R. Shake a little Ruben R out when I'm having difficulty getting out of tough stain. Right now I'm having a little difficulty getting back in the flow of making Mindy's Klub shorts, as I've taken a brief hiatus here. Because the last couple of days before my dad died, I was mostly paying attention to worrying about my dad and what was going on with him. So, and obviously with good reason. Anyway, the long and the short of it is, I've only put up like one short the last 4 or 5 days, but when I do a better job with the channel, I seem to potentially engage more and more with YouTube about it. So that's a pretty enticing lure for me. I applied for this barkeeper's friend is damn good. I've never actually I don't think I've ever used it. I've seen the product, I've heard people talk about it, but I don't think I've ever actually used it before. Uh-oh. We've got a big problem. Can you guys guess what the big problem is? It's a big problem. Yes, that's right. Meow is out of meow. Can you guess what meow and meow mean in those two things? The first meow, I'll give you a hint. It's Eric. The second one, I'll give you a hint. It rhymes with regrets. So with those two clues, you might be able to deduce that meow is out of meow can translate into Eric is out of cigarettes. Ba-bam. Yes. Let's not play around here in this particular area of hilarity. Yes, Melting Zero and everybody else, by and large, rhyming things with cigarettes provides us lots of opportunity for steep edge cliff hilarities. Cliff edge hilarities, you might say. Would you say that Kevin Hart is a comedian? I would say that he plays one on TV. Okay, so talking about YouTube, talking with famous people, Mindy's Klub. Um, these things are my life, our life, me and Rachel's life. You know, this is going to be a very challenging, or not challenging really, but it's going to be a complicated process of determining the specifics of a general course forward that I understand clearly enough, but that I'm going to need to define a little more clearly than it currently is. And Rachel and I are going to have to grow more accustomed to going from, well, for Rachel to be really genuinely fully integrated into the family. My dad always kept her at arm's length, in large part, if not, because ESTJs and INFJs have trouble recognizing each other's value. I mean, they're conflictors, but they're conflictors that don't have a lot of express conflict necessarily, but they just they're not going to see very eye to eye on things. Plus, of course, Rachel's mother is a particularly awful ESTJ. It's funny how similar her mother and my father are, except my father's not broken like her mother. He never was, he wasn't broken. She's past tense now. He wasn't malignant, malevolent, narcissistic, controlling like that. He genuinely loved us. He loved me, he loved my daughter, he loved his wife, and he made sure everybody was okay. But he was also, he was also kind of an asshole. He made Delilah cry a lot. She said on many occasions when she got done being scolded by him, "Why did he have to be such a dick about it?" Because that's David Strauss, He was an 8. Well, there's broken as in just lost a sense of self or purpose or whatever. And then there's malignant, like Rachel's mom, doing harm. Some people become a shell of themselves. Maybe it's the case that everybody whose death isn't tragic becomes a shell of themselves before they go. When my mother passes, it's not going to be tragic, right? There's nothing tragic about finally releasing my mother from the grip of this horrible identity-stealing thing called dementia. I mean, talk about a horrible thing. It's what Lou called complex loss. It's a great term. It's tragic right now. Well, I mean, I see it as a mercy, you know. I visited my mom yesterday and told her that my father had died, and she gave no indication of having understood anything, processed anything. But you know, it's awful. She's all it's, you know, it's awful. So it won't be tragic at all when she's finally at peace, you know. But that's SI fourth kind of perspective. Uh, in that regard, my dad and I are of a somewhat similar mind, you know. I don't want to be like that either. So, anyway, I'm very grateful that I've had this opportunity these last 3 years to be here for and with my parents as they return to their second babyhood. My dad never really did. He wasn't going to let that happen, but he still needed me, and he needed us here too. So he wasn't alone these last few years as my mom basically exited the picture. Whether he exactly knew that or not, or said it to himself in those terms, it is the case. Me being FI polar, I'm going to try not to do to myself what is possible to do, which is I can think of instances where I wish I had been more aware and I wish I had loved him better, but I mean, I don't know. I'm a long time away from there. I'm not interested in thinking about end of life stuff. In the aftermath of my dad's death, I've been watching Only Murders in the Building, and looking at Steve Martin and Martin Short's stuff yesterday. So, Steve Martin is 26 years older than me, and still producing great work at 77. But in a recent interview, said, you know, it's weird to think of it, but this is probably it. I probably won't pursue any more TV or movie work after this. Although, it's probably a false retirement. You know, like look at Betty White. She worked into her 90s. But by the end of their lives, if you're working into your 90s, at a certain point, everything you do is necessarily about the fact that you're very old and will die soon. It unavoidably becomes about that. Because from everybody else's perspective, you represent a possible end for themselves. One possible way to go out. Either representing how happy and engaged and yeah. Well, hopefully you're right, Michelle. I mean, you know, I did what I did, and I did so expressly with the frame that I wanted to be there for him as much as I could, as much as he'd let me, and to be as good a son as I could. And so, to the extent that I succeeded under my own frame there, under my own the frame I just said, or failed under that frame, I had the right frame. I wasn't off drunk somewhere. There were definitely alternatives to how this played out that were a lot worse. The thing about looking back, you now have the perspective that you necessarily couldn't have had before learning the lesson. Yeah, but sometimes that's not true. Sometimes people repeat mistakes. And sometimes people regret failing to have learned a lesson they should have learned. You might say that, well, even then, they didn't really mean that or something, and they hadn't learned that lesson yet, right? But at a certain point, then it just becomes determinism. So, I think it's okay to critique myself for my past failures, to also recognize that it's not fair to myself to judge myself against an ideal. I have to judge myself against realistic alternatives. I did have choices to behave differently sometimes, and also I didn't have infinite choices of how to behave differently. I didn't have limitless range of self that I could just choose to be a different person. So I had to be me, a person who's not very well suited for the role I was doing, and I needed to fill the role I was filling, and I had to negotiate those two things. The point being, given everything, to be fair to myself is to look at it holistically and say that went as well as can be expected. Which is to say, overall, Eric, you don't have to live in a pool of regret and anguish over not having been here, not having been a good son or whatever, right? Because there's lots of scenarios you can paint that where it played out differently. I started drinking again or something, or I was really busy with my debate business and couldn't be bothered, and a bunch of other shit that sometimes happens in the world could potentially have happened with me, but it didn't play out like that, and I'm grateful for that. And and while I have my regrets, it's unfair of myself. It's unfair to myself to think about the way this played out as anything but something close to the ideal way it plays out. Thanks, Michelle. So I feel pretty good. So the bottom line is, all of this is explanation as to why it is that I feel fine. It took a couple of days to process the immediate shock of it, for sure. Then I started getting anxiety because we had some difficulties getting in touch with the lawyer at first. But we haven't. Basically, at first we called. There are two people in the partnership. We thought we had. It doesn't matter. It took us a couple days to figure out the logistics, but We have an appointment today with a lawyer, and that should set into motion a variety of shit that needs to be done. Um, and we need to get that shit in motion because, you know, there are bills to be paid and stuff, and I don't want to touch any of my dad's banking shit at all until we talk to the lawyers, because uh, I want to do everything going through the appropriate legal channels. Like, I don't want to get, just because I have my dad's banking information saved on my laptop, I don't even want to log in, because I don't know I don't want to trigger some like identity theft thing, you know? So I feel relieved that we're talking to the lawyers today and setting in motion whatever needs to be set into motion. Because my dad was a real task doer, and a lot of these tasks that he did, I'm sorry to hear that, 3DR Nomad. Very sorry to hear that. I don't think it's weird to do that, Moxie, depending on the circumstances. You know, it's something that we don't talk about very much. Maybe we should talk about more. Some deaths are a lot more tragic than others. And and it doesn't devalue anybody to recognize that it matters a lot more when somebody is in their teens or 20s and passes away than when somebody's in their 90s and passes away. It just does. The world has already transitioned beyond the relevance of that 90-something-year-old. Has conscribed their entire relevance to the fact that they're that old and still alive. Nobody has their emotional eggs in that basket. Nobody's emotionally reliant on grandma still being here 10 years from now. There's not a good reason to get married when you're 99. I mean, people who are very close, like a child who's had the entirety of their life include great grandma, and maybe great grandma stays sharp till the very end, you know, then they're going to acutely feel that loss because they're a child. They expect the continuity of their life thus far to proceed forward, and then all of a sudden somebody important to them is starkly missing forevermore. Well, in that case, those kind of things are going to happen. But for people who are themselves in their majority, like over 18 or so, they will have processed that person in their own reality as having a close to expiration date and being defined by that, more or less. There's going to be this heartbreaking moment when you realize that moment has arrived, where it's a great deal of pain and anguish. But it's a much different kind of mourning process than, say, if you lose a child. Like, one thing that happened on Monday was I was feeling an irrational panic about Delilah's well-being. Like, I wanted her to text me every time she left a place or got back to a place in her car. And since my dad died, I started telling her all the time, drive carefully, seriously, drive really carefully. And, it drives home the fragility of the people in your life. But what's of note there is I have way more emotional eggs in that basket. Like, that's not something I can even think about. Delilah feels the same way about me. That, she and I have also always been very close. I can't even say anything out loud about what I'm talking about, It's too inconceivably awful. I mean, we spent the last 3 years planning this process, living the process and talking about this periodically and discussing updates to plans for their death. And, so we had some morbid conversations that were practical, but nevertheless reinforced the overarching frame of why we were here. Now, in the absence of my father, we no longer have to define our life by the deaths we're waiting for, and we get to move forward and define ourselves in our own lives. But there are some relationships that where a death it breaks you because you have too much of your identity tied up into that person or something, or just you just love them too much. I love my daughter so much, and she loves me so much, and we are so communicative with each other about it. And also, my father and I had nothing of that kind of relationship, and yet my father loved me just as much as I loved Delilah. He just it's just he didn't like, or didn't encourage anyway, explicit conversations about emotions, uh, If I told him I say I love you, Dad, he'd say, I love you too. I'm like, okay, go away now, stop that. But he definitely, loved me, and you know, family family came first was supposed to be generally a definitive rule, like, I don't know. Oh yeah, he loved me and Mom and Delilah a lot. Anyhow, um, my step siblings' father did the same thing, but when his oldest kid was only 16, they were in the house. They were severely traumatized from it, and in the past internalized to the point where they wonder where they went wrong. Yeah, well, it's a lot different, right? This wasn't. My dad had given me plenty of heads up that from years and years ago, even, that this was how he was going out. So I was actually surprised to learn that he got the handgun recently. I didn't know we had a handgun at all around here, so I was probably correct in assuming that we didn't. But uh, once once the facts of the thing emerged, I just assumed, well, he must have had that for a long time. But no, Delilah was going through his phone. He was talking about acquiring it not that long ago on on text with his friend. So, oh, Eric, did you go to the YouTube party? Not yet. It's not till later today. I don't really want to go have that. We'll have that walk down memory lane about both my parents when we bury them in Missouri as a family in a hotel room somewhere in Missouri, probably, or a restaurant in Missouri. Uh, I'm not somebody who particularly wants to spend a lot of time dwelling in FI shit. I do hold the FI stuff as an absolute value, but um, I don't live in the past. Also relating to Eric, as I'm a few years behind, but in possibly not too dissimilar a situation. Life is great and hilarious and also sad and painful. Yeah. Well, I have a struggle making my FI effective in reverse fashion. How does an ESTJ feel if there's demonstration of caring is effective? Ineffective. They probably feel like they failed to love adequately. That their FI let them down again. Something like that. I don't know. Do INFPs live in the past? More so than I do. But I don't know. You'd be better off asking an INFP. They're my supervisor type, which means I respect and recognize that they're being and with a bunch of complexities that I don't understand. And yeah. They probably think, can't you see I love you by all these TE things I've done? Yeah, they do typically think that. The INFPs I know have a tendency to live outside of present reality, whatever that is for them. Yeah, I mean, isn't that what I'm doing right now? Is living outside of the present reality, even when I'm talking about it. I'm I'm rendering it in non non experiential terms. Like this is this is part of this map that's well understood. It's likely the case that mapping types, INTPs, ENTPs, ENFJs, INFJs, that that we're the types that are best suited to process expected deaths because we expect all of reality, all of our experiences to be predictable by looking at the map. Whereas experiential types, the other way around, they expect when they look at the map, it won't contradict their experience. Of course, if you look, zoom in enough, look at a small enough portion of the map, you can find some portions of the map that won't conflict with your experience usually. But also, if you just keep a very rough map that doesn't tell you much, except well, yeah, it says over here random shit happens, so I am over there, so maybe I shouldn't be so shocked or something. Like, why is it that people who go on paranormal investigations are so shocked when they find something? Well, how is it they can even be startled, let's say? Didn't they go there expecting to see a ghost or something? So why does it startle you when you see one? Well, because they didn't go there expecting to see a ghost. They went there anticipating an experience of having a vaguely defined anticipation of nothing happening and a meaning making process about noise in the data stream. For some reason, it sounds like there's footsteps over your head right now, and you catch it on audio, and therefore it's a ghost. Well, is it the case that necessarily it was a hoax that somebody was walking up there? No, it might have just sounded like footsteps up there. What does that mean? Well, it means that somebody was paying attention to nothing so long and hard and recording it so much that they caught some noise in the data stream that sounded like footsteps above them for whatever reasons. We can't really determine what the reasons were. And think that the fact that we can't really determine what the reasons were makes it meaningful, right? But it doesn't. The fact that we can't determine what we need to determine to define it is what makes it meaningless. Nevertheless, I like to watch paranormal videos too. And I like to watch ones that make me go, oh my God. Like, but what was that though? You know? This clearly is not a fake thing. This is clearly legit. Meow, meow, meow. So what was it though? But, why do I like to watch that? It makes me feel this kind of like adrenaline-y feeling of like mystery, maybe magic. But that's it's like you're getting off on a on like epistemological sleight of hand. I don't know, so I know. Feels like I know, but I don't really know anything. And it's kind of like an adrenaline rush. It's a weird phenomenon, right? People who either believe in ghosts, have had ghost experiences, or Sasquatch, or anything paranormal. Catch video of stuff moving by itself in the middle of the night on CCTV or whatever. That kind of stuff. Well, the thing about it is, it's not like the reality of what paranormality is ever going to change. That which we call paranormal is that which has some manifestation as objective data, and seems to violate frame level rules above it. So, like if you want to call something a UFO, it can violate the frame levels in multiple ways, but it's got to violate them in some way. If you see a plane flying through the sky, that doesn't violate any of the frame levels. Oh, I gotta take this. I gotta go. Hello?
Yes, good morning. This is Sarah from Chapman Funeral Homes in Arcadia.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, I have all the forms ready for you to sign. If you want to come in and pick them up, or you can just come in and sign them, whichever is easier for you.
Yeah, okay, I'll come in and sign them, and I'll bring you the information I needed to get you as well. I have it on a sticky note here.
Oh, okay. You have it right there where you can just...
Well, no, it's actually inside the house, but I don't want to. I'm in the middle of doing something right now, so I don't want to get up and get it right now. But I'll bring it in with me, and I'll be there before 11 or so.
Okay, good. Yeah, I have a service cut starting here at about 12:30, so yeah, that'll be perfect.
Okay.
I'll have everything ready for you.
All right, cool. I'll see you there. Bye.
Thank you.
I mean, the thing is about believing it is paranormality is that which violates one of those frame level rules, or appears to, insofar as we have in the limited amount of access to the objective data that we have. So you might personally have experiences and reference subjective data as extremely revelatory about the experience. But for other people to perceive it as paranormal, we have to be talking about some piece of objective data, even if it's just your testimony about it. But ideally, some video, audio recording, something caught on camera. It could also be something like unexplainable readings, like, why is it the case that this tree here has got such a strong magnetic force coming out of it? So, the thing is, to be paranormal, something must persist in that twilight zone of violating some frame level stuff, apparently, with like case level stuff, some piece of data that runs afoul of our expectations of the world in general. So if you see a UFO and it flies through the sky like this, like zip, then really slowly this way, then zip, 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 then back here, then blinks out of existence and appears over here, then you go, okay, that violates our frames of expected movement patterns. Planes don't move like that, helicopters don't move like that, kites might move like that, but then at that point you've got something that's going to be identified as paranormal. If there's an explanation for it, it ceases to be paranormal and becomes normal. So if there's some apparent paranormal thing debunked, we've now found that the person who took these Sasquatch footprints casts actually has a footprint maker stamp foot at home. We caught him with it in his garage, so it was definitely a hoax. Okay, well then in that case, you've got it's normal now. It's no longer paranormal. It's normal. You have an explanation for it. That guy faked it. If and it will always be the case that there are events that land in this twilight gray area of giving us what appears to be some quality or quantity of objective data that runs afoul of our understandings of how the world works. But most importantly, whether or not you believe or not, quote unquote, in paranormal stuff is a moot question, because your belief in paranormality can't be used to justify anything, nor to explain anything to anybody else's satisfaction. If it were something that could be explained to anybody's satisfaction, then it would be normal, not paranormal. The thing is, what people suggest, like if you're open to dimensional realities, is begging the question. It's saying, I don't have an explanation, but I have instead some words that people might use to explain things in theory instead. So, to believe in dimensional mias as an explanation for ghosts is to say that presumably ghosts are extant in a dimension we can't observe most of the time, but that misunderstands the nature of dimension, existentiality, and perception. It's a clusterfuck of disaster, right? Is it an explanation or not? If it is an explanation, then it becomes normal. It's no longer paranormal. If it's not an explanation, then it's not an explanation. Dimensions don't work like that. Height, width, depth, time. Let's say there was breadth as well. Well, what would it mean for something to exist in just that dimension? Anything that we can conceptualize exists in either 3 dimensions or 2 dimensions. And the 2-dimensional stuff is just conceptual. So in other words, taking the fluidity out of reality, rendering it into binary representations or low-resolution data, is within the capacity of human being. Thus, we can deal with things as physicalities, objects in 3-dimensional space that persist across time. So, in other words, objects in 4-dimensional space. Or we think of them as representations of such kinds of things, you know. No, but see, that's wrong, mishap. Let's say you got an explanation of ghosts. You wouldn't be satisfied with it because it wouldn't turn out to be something magical. It would no longer have its magic. It would be an explanation. It would be a solid physical explanation, a physics kind of thing, right? And you wouldn't be satisfied with that because there's no magic in that. What you want is for science to afford legitimacy on its metrics to paranormality, but that's definitionally they're exclusive of each other. I put it this way. The question, do I think aliens exist, is meaningful if and only if there's some other question that needs to be evaluated in a way that requires that question to have an answer. I don't like questions about existence or arguments about existence or the notion that conversations about existence are purposeful. You know, this bullshit person, fake person, Eve Tall, who's one of the trolls, and another body, and it's a sock puppet. Tried to start some argument about God and the comments of a recent live stream, and how he can disprove God beyond any reasonable doubt or some shit like that. I was like, well, first you'd have to define God. And then he said, all loving, all knowing, all whatever. And I just said, oh, how cute. Because, of course, if the person were interested in talking about the subject of God and proofs thereof, then the first thing they'd want to do, if they want to talk to me about it, would be to reference my existing videos on the subject, which put the conversation already way over here, He's trying to start a conversation here. On my flow, the conversation's already way over here. I've already argued with his kind of idiot a billion times and resolved all the best argumentational stuff regarding that stuff. So it's one of the ways in which people annoy me. One of the ways to troll, either purposely or just because you don't know any better, is to come at me with some ratchet ass beginner level bullshit arguments and expect me to think that we're having a new conversation here. You know, it's like, okay, get the fuck out. The thing is, to the extent that you would define God, you'd have to define him in terms of ineffability, undefinability. You'd have to define God as that which subsumes our capacity to epistemologically contain in arguments and language. See, this is the thing, Moxie. I'm never sure exactly how much certain people are being purposefully annoying to me and how much certain people are being themselves and being genuine and just representing a level of a lack of nuance that I don't know, because the thing is, yes, Dunning-Kruger exists, right? But here's the deal. It's also the case that we all use language. We all use language to communicate things. And we all treat words more or less as though they mean certain things. So there's a basic level of ability to communicate that everybody has. Now, that doesn't mean everybody can understand what everybody else is saying all the time, because sometimes people are talking about stuff that requires specialized knowledge, right? But we should all be able to tell something like this. Like, if you come around this channel and listen to me talk about any sort of philosophical matter or typological matter or stuff like God argumentation, like, if the person who wants to start this argument about God watched any of my existing videos on God, they wouldn't begin the conversation at that spot exactly. But regardless, people should be able to recognize when they hear somebody using a bunch of complicated physics language they don't understand, that they shouldn't go up and start lecturing the person who's talking about it, about physics, right? The challenge that I have is I'm clearly discussing something in a nuanced and adult way, right? That's the product of many years of being a philosopher. Now, I've been an applied philosopher, which is to say a debate coach. But ultimately, the reason I was such an effective and good mechanical engineer, or let's, even some other kind of engineer, but is because I was such a good theoretical physicist, which is not the normal way to go about things, really. But within debate, it is not necessarily the case that the best thinkers, best case makers, are the best coaches. Usually, in most circumstances, case making is not the determinant factor in who wins the debate round. the thing is, with me, I was surprised to learn. This took me a lot of years to accept that it was true, but I had to eventually. I think better than most of even the best debate coaches about these matters. And my cases, the casework that I did with my students and directionality that I gave them as to how and where to argue, I always operated from the frame of what's the most correct arguments, because those ultimately win. If you don't mess up your advantage that you have, you automatically begin with an advantage because you're more correct. Occasionally, very rarely, what's correct is too complicated to explain adequately in a debate round and win with it. That sometimes happens. But by and large, it doesn't. So, as a debate coach, my kids won because their coach was smarter about philosophy than all the other coaches. I mean, we won shit tons of trophies over the years. I mean, I can't even begin to count. When I was working at Kudos as the director and program architect and head coach and stuff, we had I roll into tournaments with a massive fucking squad of kids, all in suits. We close shit out. We closed out policy at Fullerton. We closing it out means, because it's a zero-sum thing. Once you get to breaks where it's like golf, okay? Except it's like golf meets tennis. You have the whole field, and then you break it down to a field of 32 or 16 for the last stretch, which is done tournament style, like the Sweet 16. So if you close out, that means like you win. If you win all 4 quarterfinals debates, then you close out in quarters. We'd close out in quarters sometimes. I had an 8th grader win a high school invitational tournament in Lincoln Douglas. At the middle school level, our squad was dominant, and it was probably largely responsible for changing rules that excluded schools like ours from competing at middle school nationals. So, I mean, that's how many times we won. We won like none of us could believe, frankly. There was a stretch of time where it was shocking. I felt like Gino, whatever his last name is, at UConn, when he won all those national championships in a row. They said it wasn't that long, but I mean, for a good 6 years or so there, I had a fucking juggernaut. I don't have any thoughts on monkeypox. It sounds scary. I don't want to get it. Do I have any EP students? Yeah. My best debaters were generally NTPs and NTJs. I had one really good ENTJ debater I can think of, and she took a long time to get really good, but she did get really good. In fact, I think there's still a video of her potentially online reading a case. Her name's Courtney. If you were to channel search my channel with Courtney Debate, it might show up. She's an ENTJ. But my best debaters were several ENTPs and a couple of INTPs, a couple of INTJs. What type do you think is the worst at debate? I mean, ISFJs don't like it. I'll tell you that. They don't like it at all. They quit. They always quit right away. I mean, obviously, ISFPs are just completely at a loss. ISTPs get frustrated by it. They may get excited about it at first, but then they get very frustrated by it. If TI is deduction, is NI abduction? Inferring to the most reasonable explanation? No, I mean, NI is intuition. It's disinterested knowledge regarding identity, whereas SI is interested knowledge regarding identity. I think it might have been on a stream, but Rachel said the other day, I feel so sorry because I have this image, this moment in my head of you standing there looking over your dad's body, standing there looking at him on the ground. And I said, well, I'm SI. I've got the whole thing from start to finish, so don't worry about it. I could walk through it moment by moment, the whole thing start to finish. And that's okay, because those kind of memories, that kind of high resolution data fades over time, usually, or it becomes condensed into these kind of artificial SI impressions. Courtney was a badass. She wasn't that intuitively deft. Yeah, ENFPs can be good debaters. I even had a coach who was an ENFP. But the thing is, they have a very TE approach to things. And they've got, I don't know, Jim Freeman, who's an ENFP and my former assistant coach, is killing it in China right now. And my other former assistant coach, Scott Wheeler, who went on to have national champions with a couple of my former debaters at high school, Jerry Wang and Jerry Wang and what was his partner's name? His partner wasn't my debater. Anyway, they won national championship a couple of years in a row in high school. So it's like I've got a powerful coaching legacy. Some of my ex-assistant coaches are big names in debate now. So that's kind of nice. I like to have, like Danielle Dosh was my coaching granddaughter. My former debater, David Dosh, who I started working with when he was a sixth grader, he went on to coach his own sister, Danielle Dosh, when she was in high school, and he was in his early 20s at that point. And she got more TOC bids in her senior year, I think, than anybody had ever gotten before. She got I don't know, it was double-digit TOC bids. Now, ISTJ, they don't like debate. They hate to have to come up with shit on their feet, language-wise. Anyway, I gotta go. I gotta go to the mortuary to give them some information, sign some forms, etc. Yeah, I gotta go get cigarettes as well. Fancy books with Nancy and Daniel? I have no idea what that is, but I'm curious. Well, thanks for being here, everybody. I love you all. I'll keep everyone updated about reality as it proceeds through the day. Goodbye, good night, and good luck.